Michael Turner had never been a fan of blind dates. At 38, he was a single father who had long given up on the idea of romance, focusing instead on raising his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, and working long, grueling hours at the auto shop to keep a roof over their heads. His days were filled with grease, the hum of engines, and the quiet moments of bedtime stories, and though he sometimes longed for companionship, he always dismissed it as something for other people, not him. His best friend Jake, however, was relentless, insisting Michael needed to get back out there. For months, Michael resisted, until Jake's wife, Laura, secretly signed him up for a local, parents meet and dine, event and conveniently neglected to tell him until the day of. That was how Michael found himself sitting nervously at a small bistro on a Thursday evening, tugging at the collar of his only clean button-down shirt and glancing at his watch every other minute, wondering if this was the biggest mistake of his life. He expected someone maybe like him, a tired single parent juggling one kid, maybe two at most, someone who understood the exhaustion and the guardedness that came with single parenthood. What he did not expect was the sight that greeted him when the hostess finally walked him over to his table. Sitting there was a woman with striking features softened by kind eyes and a warm smile. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, her posture upright and confident, but not unkind. "Michael?" she asked, standing to shake his hand with a firm grip that carried the weight of someone used to discipline. "I'm Sarah Reynolds." She introduced herself with an ease that caught Michael off guard. He opened his mouth to reply, but before he could form words, the commotion behind her stole his attention. One by one, 5 children filed into the booth, their voices filling the quiet corner of the bistro like a sudden storm. The oldest, a teenage boy, carried a backpack slung carelessly over his shoulder, while the youngest, a toddler with sticky hands and wide eyes, climbed eagerly into Sarah's lap. Michael blinked, utterly stunned, his jaw tightening as he tried to process what he was seeing. These are yours?" he finally asked, half joking, half panicked. Sarah's laugh was soft but certain, the kind of laugh that came from years of answering the same question. "All mine," she said proudly. "And no, I'm not joking." Michael's mind spun. 5 kids. 5. He thought about the chaos of bedtime, the grocery bills, the noise, the mess, the sheer impossibility of it all. For a fleeting moment, he wanted to run. He didn't know how to do this with one child most days, how could anyone manage 5? But then, as if sensing his hesitation, the toddler reached across the table and tugged on his sleeve, giggling at the dark grease stain smudged on his pocket from work. Something about that innocent gesture made his chest tighten. Sarah noticed his unease, her expression softening as she said quietly, "If it's too much, I understand. You don't have to stay." But Michael didn't move. He couldn't explain why, but there was something in Sarah's steady gaze and in the laughter of her children that anchored him to the spot. By the time dessert came, Michael realized that against all odds, he hadn't laughed this much in years, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel so alone. Over the following weeks, Michael found himself unexpectedly drawn into Sarah's world, though at first, it felt like stepping into a storm. His life had always been relatively quiet, his little house usually echoed with Lily's soft chatter, the hum of the television, or the occasional squeal of laughter when they played board games together. But Sarah's household was a whirlwind of noise and energy. Her 5 children each carried their own rhythm, from the teenager blasting music in his room to the twin girls constantly bickering over toys, to the toddler who seemed determined to test the limits of gravity. For Michael, who had grown used to calm predictability, their noise felt overwhelming, and he sometimes wondered what kind of man could willingly step into such chaos. And yet, every time he felt tempted to retreat, Sarah had a way of drawing him back in, not with demands, but with her quiet resilience. A soldier by training, she managed her home with a mixture of military precision and maternal warmth. Meals were served on time, chores were divided like missions, and even the youngest had learned the value of teamwork. Michael marveled at her ability to juggle so much, but he also felt intimidated. He worried that he could never measure up, never provide enough, never truly belong in such a demanding world. One evening, he was tested when Sarah's car broke down, leaving her stranded outside the school after picking up her kids. Without hesitation, Michael showed up in his oil-stained overalls, tools in hand, and fixed the engine right there in the parking lot while her children huddled around him, wide-eyed. They asked questions about wrenches and spark plugs, calling him a real-life superhero, and though Michael brushed it off with embarrassment, Sarah's eyes lingered on him with something deeper than gratitude. In that moment, she saw not just a man good with his hands but someone who showed up when it mattered, without being asked twice. Still, not everything blended easily. Michael struggled with the constant demands, the sheer responsibility of so many little lives buzzing around him, and Sarah worried that one bad day might send him running for good. That fear became real one chaotic evening when Michael joined them for dinner. The spaghetti boiled over on the stove, the toddler tipped his cup of juice onto the floor, the twins argued so loudly that Lily covered her ears, and the teenager stormed off after a minor disagreement. Michael felt the walls closing in, his chest tightening as doubt gnawed at him. Was this really what he wanted? He excused himself after the meal, muttering something about an early shift, but Sarah followed him to the door, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "Michael," she said softly, "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be real." The sincerity in her words lingered with him long after he drove away, echoing in his mind as he wrestled with a truth he wasn't ready to admit, that despite the chaos, a part of him wanted to stay. Days passed after that chaotic dinner, and Michael couldn't shake Sarah's words from his mind. "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be real." They echoed each night when he tucked Lily into bed and in the quiet moments at the shop when he tightened bolts and wiped grease from his hands. He had been so afraid of failing, of not being enough, that he hadn't stopped to see what Sarah had been offering him, not judgment, not pressure, but a chance to simply show up as himself. It was Lily, however, who ultimately broke the silence. One Saturday morning, she climbed into his lap with her favorite stuffed bunny and asked innocently, "Daddy, can Sarah's kids come over for pancakes?" Michael hesitated, his heart skipping at the thought of his quiet little kitchen invaded by 5 more children, but the eagerness in Lily's eyes made it impossible to say no. That morning, his house turned into a lively circus. Sarah arrived with her children in tow, and within minutes the kitchen was filled with laughter, chatter, and the unmistakable smell of burning batter. The twins giggled as they tried to flip pancakes that ended up half on the floor. The teenager surprised Michael by calmly taking over the stove with impressive skill, and the toddler sat in Lily's lap, smearing syrup across both their faces. It was messy, noisy, and far from perfect, but when Michael glanced at Lily's radiant smile, he realized she had never looked happier. For years she had been an only child, often lonely despite his best efforts, but now she was surrounded by siblings she never had, and her laughter rang through the house like music. That day marked a shift inside Michael. Maybe what he had always called chaos was really just another kind of family. Over the following weeks, he began to let down the walls he had built around his heart. He taught Sarah's oldest son how to change oil and check spark plugs, proud when the boy's face lit up with confidence. He steadied one of the twins as she wobbled on her bike until she rode away cheering, and he discovered a surprising talent for bedtime stories when the toddler insisted on his deep, monster voice before falling asleep. At the same time, Sarah quietly slipped into Lily's world with the same grace she managed her own children. She sat front row at Lily's school recital, squeezing her hand before she went on stage, and she encouraged Lily's timid confidence to bloom in a way that melted Michael's heart. Yet beneath these joyful moments lay the looming shadow of Sarah's duty. One night, as they sat on her porch after the kids were asleep, she revealed the news that she had been called for another short deployment. The thought of her leaving again made Michael's chest tighten with fear, not just for her but for the children who depended on her. Sarah's strong composure cracked as she admitted softly, "I've raised them to be strong, but I don't want them to think love is temporary." Without thinking, Michael reached over, his calloused hand covering hers, and spoke words he hadn't planned but felt truer than anything he had ever said, "Then let me show them it isn't." For the first time, Sarah's steady soldier's eyes filled with tears, and in that moment, Michael realized he wasn't standing at the edge of chaos anymore, he was stepping into something worth fighting for. Sarah's deployment lasted only a few weeks, but for Michael and the children, it felt like a lifetime. He stepped into a role he had never imagined for himself, showing up each morning to help with school drop-offs, juggling homework battles in the evenings, and learning the delicate balance of listening when the teenager was moody but also standing firm when boundaries were tested. It wasn't easy. There were nights he collapsed on his couch with grease-stained hands and exhaustion pulling at his bones, but every time he looked over at Lily, laughing with Sarah's kids as if they had always been siblings, his heart reminded him why he stayed. When Sarah finally returned, she walked through the airport doors in uniform, scanning the crowd until she froze at the sight of Michael standing there with Lily, holding a homemade sign that read, "Welcome home, Mom." Her 5 children broke into shouts and tears, rushing into her arms, but what struck her most was the sight of Michael waiting patiently behind them, steady and unshaken, as if he belonged there all along. That was when she realized that while she had been gone, he hadn't just been helping, he had become part of their family. The following months sealed what deployment had revealed. They didn't have fairy tale moments of perfection, instead, they had real life, missed alarms, late bills, spilled juice, scraped knees, and laughter echoing through the small house that suddenly felt far too small for the love it held. Michael proposed in the most ordinary way, at a backyard barbecue where the kids were running barefoot in the grass, holding out a simple ring box as he whispered to Sarah, "I don't just want you. I want us, all of us." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, and the children, who had been listening from the porch, erupted in cheers as though they had been waiting for this very moment. Life after that was far from smooth. Blending families brought new challenges, from coordinating chores to stretching paychecks further than ever, but through it all, Michael found something he had never expected: peace. He had once thought his quiet, predictable life was the safest way to live, but now, sitting on the couch with 6 children piled around him during movie nights and Sarah's hand laced with his, he understood that true safety wasn't in silence but in belonging. One evening, Lily leaned against him, her voice soft as she whispered, "Daddy, we're not alone anymore." Michael looked around at the chaos, his chaos, their chaos, and smiled with a fullness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Sarah's eyes met his across the room, filled with gratitude and love, and he knew then that what had started as a blind date he nearly walked away from had turned into the family he never dared to dream of. For the first time since his world had fallen apart years ago, Michael wasn't just surviving, he was home.